Well, it is good to be with you guys. As always, glad I had a chance to meet you. My name is Patrick, and I serve as serving as a pastor at our Monaco Christian Fellowship, and I get to come and be with you guys on occasion as well. And came from New York, served in New York, was a church planter and pastor there for 12 years. And every year that we lived in New York City, my mom and my dad would at least make one trip to the city to visit with us, to serve alongside of our church, or just find ways to encourage us. And in September of 2019, my mom made what would be her last trip to New York. We didn't know it at the time, but in a couple of months, she would be diagnosed with an aggressive type of lung cancer. Surgery wasn't an option. Chemo and radiation would end up doing more harm than help. Based on the location of the tumor, the day after Christmas 2019, she went to the hospital and wouldn't come home until the day she passed away at home on February 2nd, 2020. And for me, those were challenging days, days of pain, days of struggle to keep hope, days of wanting physical healing and not seeing it happen. But those were also days for me of inspiration and amazement because of what I witnessed. I was able to be home with my parents for the last few weeks of this struggle, and the love that I saw my father demonstrate from my mother over those weeks was beyond experience. It wasn't that he didn't just leave her side. It was the way he cared for her, looked after her comfort the way that no one else could. Watching him whisper words that I couldn't hear into her ears and seeing a smile come across her face. The way he would hold her hand, caress her cheek, brush her hair, moisten her lips as they grew dry. The way he was there as close as he could be until the very end was inspiring and was the example of true, deep love filled with compassion and mercy. I had seen them in my life love each other in good times and even through difficult days. But actually seeing someone love someone to death, he gave me a new depth of understanding of love. And this is the kind of love we're going to talk about today. A love for one another. Been doing a series of Monaco based on this idea of love shown in 3 acts. And we started with the idea of love for the Lord and how we love the Lord with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and how that emboldens us then to step into these next 2 acts of loving others and loving our enemies. And today we're going to look at this act 2, the love for other people. How do we, as people, love others the way that God called us to? The passage today we're going to kind of sit around is in Luke 10, and it's one you may be familiar with, but it's this encounter Jesus has with a lawyer. It's recorded in a couple of different gospels in different ways, but look at this and we're going to grab some streets out of here. Luke 10:25 says, behold, a lawyer stood up and put him to the test, talking about Jesus, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus said to him, what is written in the law? How do you read it? And the man answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said to him, you have answered correctly. Do this and you will live. But the lawyer, desiring to justify himself to Jesus, said, who is my neighbor? When I think about these commands, they sound beautiful and simple. Love the Lord, love others, love your neighbor, show kindness to those around you, be a good friend, think about how your actions impact other people. And honestly, when we think about love for others, we often just think about this idea of trying not to be a jerk to somebody else. Just trying not to do something to offend other people. When we lived in New York, it was easy to identify people that were jerks, right? It was very easy. It's for people who tried to get on the subway first before people could get off. You see that on the train. There are these people fighting for a seat. Or maybe there's people who would block the escalators and wouldn't let people walk up. People who would come out of the exits and just stop at the top of the stairs. Like there was nobody else behind them coming out. It was easy to see. And we basically make this love for others means, look, if you don't get in my way, I won't get in your way. If you don't offend me, I won't offend you. And we think that loving our neighbor is different than loving your friends, your spouse, your kids, your family. It's just kind of this general respect for humanity. Let's just generally respect each other. But look back at the command, right? It says there to not love your neighbor as your family, as your friends, in general humanity, but what? Love them as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. This is quite a challenge because I know how much we love to love ourselves. We want blessings for ourselves. We want kindness for ourselves. We want to give ourselves the benefit of the doubt. We think the best about ourselves, even when we fall short. We give ourselves some slack because we know what kind of day we've had. This love that we have for ourselves is the most understanding love there is. It's the most sacrificial love there is. And this is the type of love that Jesus says we are to show to our neighbors. A love that is accommodating, not just accommodating, but elevating. And as difficult as this is, as hard it is to take in, it was also difficult for Jesus' audience in that day. And I think the question that the lawyer poses at the end here is the same question I would have is, all right, who is my neighbor? This is actually a bad question, right? What he's trying to do is to justify himself. He's basically saying, tell me the least I can do to give back. And many times our Christian faith, we ask the wrong questions, right? We'll say, God, how much can I sin and still be considered righteous? How much can I get away with and still be called holy? How little do I have to sacrifice for you? How little do I have to love others and still follow the commands? These are bad questions. And Jesus answers this question of who is my neighbor with a story. Not a story that answers the questions directly, but a story pushes against these wrong motives of these questions. And it's the story of the Good Samaritan. You've heard it probably if you've been around church at all. You grew up in kids' Sunday school. We did coloring sheets of this. This is a story that's been around a long time. And so instead of me just reading it today, I kind of wrote it out in kind of a narrative story. So listen to this story of the Good Samaritan. The road to Jericho. The sun blazed mercilessly over the rugged hills of Judea, casting jagged shadows across the winding road to Jericho. It was a path feared by many, a desolate stretch where thieves lurked like wolves among the rocks. Yet a lone traveler passed on, his sandals scraping against the dust and his cloak clinging to his weary frame. Then, from the silence came the ambush. They struck like shadows, faces masked, blades flashing. A cry tore through the still air as fists rained down. His purse was ripped away, his garments torn, and when the robbers vanished into the wilderness, they left behind a broken man, bleeding, stripped, and barely breathing. His body lay sprawled on the unforgiving earth, the road stretching endlessly before him as a cruel promise. And yet, footsteps echoed in the distance. A figure approached, heading into the opposite direction toward Jerusalem. It was a priest, robes flowing, eyes fixed ahead. He spotted the man out of the corner of his eye, yet he never slowed his pace. His gaze shifted away as quickly as it had turned to the man. Any thought of stopping to offer aid was quickly pushed out of his mind by the task awaiting him at the temple. More important, more pressing task than this stranger in need on the side of the road. Perhaps he whispered a prayer for the man. Perhaps he tightened his grip on his own cloak, but his pace quickened and soon he was gone, leaving the silence heavier than before. Footsteps approached again. Another traveler came following the priest. It was a Levite, a man learned and devout with much to prove. His sandals slowed as he neared the wounded man. He looked and he saw the pain the man was in and the blood flowing from his wounds. Instead of coming toward the man, he quickly veered to the opposite side of the road. His devotion to the law caused him to steer clear of blood or anything that would make him unclean. He was heading to Jerusalem, and the last thing he wanted was to show up unclean and be forced to go through cleansing rituals. His mind filled with reasons this man was abandoned. Surely he had done something to displease God. He was getting what he deserved. A contempt for the man began to grow in his heart. Then, like the priest before him, he sped on his way, leaving the man alone. The road swallowed his retreating steps, and the man's hope dimmed like a fading light. Finally, then, a stranger came, a Samaritan. His people were despised, his name spoken with scorn in these lands. A man often found himself on the wrong end of injustice and discrimination. Yet when his eyes fell upon this broken figure, something stirred within him. Compassion surged like a river breaking its banks. He ran to the man without hesitation. He knelt beside him and touched his wounds with gentle hands. From his pack, he drew oil and wine, some of his most precious commodities, and he used them to cleanse and soothe the torn flesh. He tore strips from his own garments to bind the bleeding. Then, with the strength born of mercy, he lifted the man onto his beast and began a long, weary walk toward an end he knew at the other side of town. At the end, he did not simply leave them. He stayed through the night, tending, watching, caring. And when dawn broke, he placed silver coins in the innkeeper's hands and said, "Care for him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay when I return." This was Jesus' answer to who is your neighbor. That was the question. Who is my neighbor? And Jesus pops the story in it. And I don't know about you, but doesn't necessarily immediately answer the question. It doesn't narrow my focus. It doesn't give me reason to leave others behind. It actually broadens the answer of what I was looking for. And what Jesus does here is amazing. Instead of limiting the expression of love to others, the two villains of the story are ones that would have been listening, that people listening would have held as holy, pious, and righteous. Yet they did nothing for this man. Mm-hmm. Instead, they made excuses, rationalized why they couldn't or shouldn't help. And instead, Jesus uses a Samaritan, the antithesis of who the audience would consider holy and righteous, as the hero of the story. The lowest of lows, stopped, sacrificed, and showed true love for this man's need. But Jesus was answering this question by saying, love for others is not about debating the limitation or theoretical intentions. It is about actions, demonstrations, and choosing to act, choosing to get involved. Which brings us to this next question about loving others. Because to be honest, if I stopped or you stopped to help every person that we saw in need in Nice or wherever you live, my pockets would be empty soon as well. I would be in their situation. I would be broke and in need. And so today we're going to look at how the act of this play unfolds. There's always an act, an opening problem, and then there's a type of conflict, and then a conclusion. And we're going to start by seeing how this play unfolds today by looking at what opens the curtain. What opens the curtain to our willingness to respond to people in need. And I think when we look at this story, we see three things that tell us how and we should open that curtain. Neighborly love should be expressed when we first have proximity, right? It says the Samaritan saw him and he went to him. The word neighbor here literally means to be near, to be close by, have proximity to. Now, that's not just physically. It can be emotionally, relationally, different ways that we are near to someone. If we're near to someone and we see a need, it should start us to open up and consider aiding. But also opportunity. He said he did what he could. He immediately responded. What I loved about the story of the Samaritan, he didn't in that moment think, you know what, I could come back tomorrow. If this guy's still here, then I can do something. I got something else to do today. I'm busy. Like the priest and the Levite. No, he had an opportunity and he took it. But he also then had the capacity. He had an animal. He had the necessary resources. He had something that God had given him to use to be a blessing to others. And while in this story, part of it was finances, it's not always finances, right? But when we find ourselves close to somebody, an immediate opportunity to respond, we can do something. Can we have the capacity to do it, the capability to do it? I think God prompts us to do it. Which brings us to the part of all this together. It's when the Spirit prompts you to respond, we should respond. When the Spirit prompts you to respond, you should respond. there are a few things we probably wish were on this list, right? Like I wish it was convenient. I wish it was limited to certain relationships or my own personal judgment. But Jesus clearly communicates that those are not the precursors to responding with love toward other people. It boils down to be ready, willing, and able. Let me share how this played out in my life a couple of times. Years ago, I was at a gas station filling up my car, and a lady approached me asking for some money. And my initial thought was, she's got to take this from the convenience store, buy something she doesn't need. And she kept pushing and said, I just need money for a prescription for my child. And so I said, well, how much is it? And she literally pulled out the prescription, and the number was written on there from the pharmacy of what she needed. And I kid you not, it was the exact amount of money I had in my pockets. So I just kept my money. No, actually, I did, because it was clear in that moment. I was close to her. I had the opportunity to respond. I didn't even have to go to an ATM to get money. It was in my pocket. It was my capacity. I had the capability to respond. So it was just one of those moments. I remember another similar one. We were out with some friends in New York eating at a nice steak restaurant they had invited us to, and we had leftovers. We're sitting outside along this sidewalk, and a guy walks by and he asks for money again. And we said, I don't really have any money. I said, but if you're hungry, we have some leftover steak. And he was like, you know what? I needed money to buy dinner, so I will take your dinner and I will go home. And we gave him our leftovers. He probably had one of the best leftover meals he's ever had. But the beautiful thing is I've also been the recipient of things like this. Our first year in New York, we had a major medical bill before we had insurance there. And it was like in the thousands of dollars. I didn't know how I was going to pay it. It was a challenge. And unbeknownst to me, a church in Georgia, in the United States, had taken up an offering for us the Wednesday before. Just that day, when I was trying to figure out how we're going to pay for this, I go to our mailbox and I open up, and there's something from that church. I open up and it's a check. And it was not exactly to the penny for what we needed. It was 32 cents more, which actually was the cost of the stamp. Just send it in for that. I love when I see things like that happen. I love when you see these opportunities play out because of proximity, opportunity, and people responding with their capacity when the Lord directs. But why don't we do this? Why don't we? Because honestly, the truth is, in any good story, there's some competing elements, things that are fighting each other. And you see these play out in this story, these verses, moments. And we're going to look first at the competing elements of compassion and indifference. We see compassion shown by the Samaritan and indifference by the priest. Look at Luke 10:31-33. It says this. Now, by chance, a priest was going down the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. Indifference and compassion. Two competing things in our heart. Let's look at compassion first. What do we know about compassion? One, compassion requires a choice. It's a choice that you and I make to demonstrate. It can be a feeling. Compassion here is to me something I feel to my core. I feel to the very core of who I am that causes me to want to respond. And that's what the Samaritan felt in this moment. In that moment, he saw a need and he had compassion. He felt something for this man. So it brings me to a question of if we see somebody in need and we don't care, we're indifferent. But I think that maybe because we have not fully engaged and remembered how much we were in need when God loved us. When God found us in our brokenness. So compassion is a choice, but compassion also invokes a response. It is a step to do something. It's not just noticing the need of others and being sympathetic toward them. The easiest thing to do when somebody says they have a need is, as a believer, is to say what? Well, I'll pray for you. I'll pray for you. You just pray. I'm glad you do pray. But you know what prayer ought to do within us? We're not then asking God to intervene miraculously in their life. When I pray, if somebody says to me, I have a need, my prayer to God is this. God, how do I need this good? How do I need to step in the situation? That's what compassion is. It invokes a response. Just like the Samaritan. He didn't stop and see who the man was, see if he was worthy or not of this. He actually just responded to the need. And then compassion demands the sacrifice. A sacrifice, Steve. It's going to cost me something. True compassion is going to cost me time, energy, effort, money. It's going to cost me resources. By the time the priest and the Levite had safely arrived at wherever their destination was, they were lying down, sleeping in their own beds, in the comfort of their own homes. The Samaritan was checking in to some dingy roadside inn, carrying this man being within an inch of his life. He had not only made the choice to stop and decided to respond, but he demonstrated a willingness to sacrifice for the needs of others. True compassion has no limit to me. If our neighbor is hurting or in need, the compassionate responds, and it responds with sacrifice. Imagine if we all really lived this way. Sure. When we limit compassion, we're actually creating barriers in relationships. You know who's the most beautiful example of unlimited compassion? It's Christ. It's Jesus, right? Jesus, the ultimate sacrifice. His sacrifice was even to death for you and I. But now let's look at this, the priest, the man who showed indifference. Just as compassion is something we feel, indifference isn't just ignoring something, it's ignoring something on purpose. Choosing to ignore. No intent to look that way, to not be bothered, to care less, to care as least as you can. And this plays out in our life as well. To be indifferent requires avoidance, an avoidance of the problem. And we have to actually choose to avoid what's going on in somebody's life. So, just as much as you choose to get involved, indifference is a choice to step back, away. Indifference also requires an apathy toward others. Not just the person, but the pain and the suffering of others in general. The problems of the world, poverty, relationship pains, anxiety, depression, conflicts, wars. We start to think these are all too big. What can I do? So I just won't care about them. I'll avoid them, even on the smallest level. We start to become apathetic about these problems, which leads to neglect. So we start to actively neglect others. When we actually see a tangible need in front of us that we could help, and we wash our hands of it, walk away. It's withholding love, withholding help, withholding our presence and basic care, leaving them to that. And the fun is what the priest did. As you see here, both of these are pathways, right? We make a choice to walk down one or the other. So we never get to the point of sacrificing for others if we don't make the choice to embrace compassion. Then we'll end up neglecting others when we start down the slippery slope of avoidance and apathy. But there are two other competing things as well. We're going to see this with the Levite and the Samaritan. Look at Luke 22, or 10, 32, and 36, 37. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place where he saw him, he passed on the other side. And Jesus asked, which of these three do you think proved to be the neighbor of the man who fell among the robbers? And he said, the one that showed him mercy. And what we see here is the conflict between mercy and disdain. The Levite had disdain, but the Samaritan showed mercy. What is mercy? Quickly, it removes things from our lives. Mercy first removes labels that we place on other people. We don't define people by generic labels, male, female, black, white, nationality, socioeconomic standing. These all carry meaning, but they are not the defining quality of each of us. And they don't determine whether we show mercy or not. Mercy also removes levels, hierarchy. So hierarchy is simply man-made status and perceptions. And how often do we assume or equate wealth with intelligence and diligence, and poverty with stupidity and laziness? When in fact, most of the world lives in poverty. And most of the world lives in poverty not because of lack of intellect or lack of work ethic, but because of inequality and injustice. And mercy moves beyond and in between the social strata. And finally, what mercy removes is barriers. Barriers to respond. Historical and personal barriers, hate and pride. The truth is, this Samaritan had every reason not to stop and help this Jewish man. This Jewish man and maybe not specifically, but his people had harmed and hurt the Samaritan people for years. This man had no ethical response that he had to have, but instead he broke through the barriers and showed mercy. Just as true compassion has no limit, true mercy has no motive. It's not about what I'm going to get back in return. If I do something for you, what are you going to do for me? Mercy is pouring life into someone who, without exception, has nothing to return for you. Yes, and Jesus, again, right? Jesus, the King of heaven, who became a suffering servant to show mercy to us. But what about the ugly side, the disdained side? The more we know about the Levite and what the Levite did in that moment, you understand his background and the story Jesus was telling, you see that he had true disdain for this man. He had an anger toward him because of what he saw. And disdain does this in our own lives. As we see somebody in need and we start to hand judgment. We start to look at them and we start to judge them just as the Levite did. And this man is there for his own reasons. God's punishing him. Why should I help him if God's doing this in his life? And while some of that they got themselves into their own situation might be true, it still does not negate the fact that they are in need and dying without the help of others. Judgment causes us to make determinations about the person's value. And more often than not, we find them not valuable enough to be called. But disdain also adds hierarchy, right? It's higher. We talk about removing levels. It starts adding levels of I can only help certain people if they can do something for me and back in return. I'm gonna help somebody. They're gonna owe me something. I want them to open a door for me that can't be opened otherwise. We aren't worthy, and they aren't worthy enough. There's no chance we help them. And finally, disdain adds hostility. This hostility, we start to grow angry between them. Instead of wanting to respond with compassion and mercy, we show anger. We get upset. We shouldn't have taken this road. Why are you by yourself? You knew it was dangerous. Why did you make yourself an easy target? Why didn't you fight back? Where's your family? Why does no one care enough about you to come looking for you? We start adding disdain and hostility toward the target that needs compassion. The key idea is this: will we spend our time removing barriers and helping others, or building walls to keep mercy from getting in? Which brings us to the closing act. Curtain call of Jesus, as he says this to the man. After he heard this story, he said, "You go and do likewise. Be a Samaritan." That would have been unheard of to a Jewish person. Say, go and be this good Samaritan. Go and do what this man. Help somebody who didn't deserve it. They can't do anything for you in return. But you pour out compassion and mercy. I love verse 37. There's a one to hold on to. You go and do likewise, gentlemen. You know, I think the reality is these play out every day in our lives. It's not just people that we see in need on the side of the street. It's not just moments that we walk by a homeless person and figure out if we should help or not. Okay. These play out in our closest relationships, our daily interactions. Why is our marriage struggling? Why is there no peace with our children? Why is there always conflict with certain relatives or coworkers? Why do we get angry and frustrated with strangers when they seem like they're just wanting to make our lives more difficult? It's because we don't choose compassion. We aren't demonstrating mercy. I'm not saying every conflict is your fault, but I am saying that you have every opportunity to respond with compassion and mercy in moments of conflict and in need. Compassion and mercy do no harm. They don't make things worse. They might not always solve the problem, and some of that is based on how the other person receives it, but compassion and mercy certainly won't create more hate, bitterness, apathy, disdain, or indifference. Go and do likewise. in your relationships today, which is our question of the day. Where are you missing the opportunity to demonstrate compassion and mercy?
Another section.
Toward strangers, toward your spouse, toward your children, toward relatives that get on your nerves, toward friends that have hurt you. Where are you missing the opportunity to demonstrate compassion and mercy?